Hey YouTube, Dosm here with the Power Rangers Turbo Ramble. This one took a little bit longer than normal, or at least for me I thought it did. I planned on releasing it last week, but then I got some reviews I wanted to have priority. But now we are finally doing it. So I guess we'll go ahead and jump in with this Turbo stuff. So, I said this on Twitter, but I think the best way to sum up Turbo in one word would be awkward. Turbo had a lot of unfortunate things go on around it, behind the scenes and whatnot, that I think contributed to how weird it ended up being. Mainly, I talked about this a lot in the last one, was the transition between Zeo and Turbo. We had a really great transition between Zeo and Turbo. Or not Zeo Turbo, that's not right. And Mighty Morphin and Zeo, there we go. And this one was very awkward. I think it was due to a lot of things. One was they decided to make the movie the transition point. Because, you know, with the first movie, that could have been the transition point, aside from the suits being different, but they decided to separate them, but in this case they decided to make the same. So the main transition was done in the movie. And so as a result, the pilot episodes of the actual series were them telling you about what happened in the movie. So that was one awkward thing. And then there was the explanation of where did the Zeo powers go, which was very important to me, because the transition from MMPR to Zeo was handled so well, and such importance was placed on the Zeo powers, not just, you know, within the universe of, like, they talked about how powerful the Zeo powers were, but, the Zeo powers were this really cool next step in Power Rangers, and now they're all of a sudden tossed aside, seemingly. Because we essentially got no explanation. They're just like, hey, pirates are here, time for cars. Now, there were several behind-the-scenes things I read. I read that, Johnny Young Bosch and I think Nakia Breeze said in some interviews, and some other people in some interviews, that there was plans to explain what happened to the Zeo powers. Some places I've read that it was just in the script, other places I've read that it was filmed. So I think there was something planned that just got lost in the shuffle. There's also been rumors around for a long time that Billy was going to be involved, because it was rumored he was involved in the movie, which filmed during Zeo, and then he left, so he wasn't in the movie. So there's like a headcanon theory that when he was believed to be the Gold Ranger when he was missing, he was working on the Turbo powers. I'm going to accept that into headcanon. Maybe they used the Zeo Crystal to create new powers, maybe the Turbo powers are an upgrade, but in my headcanon, Billy created it because I like to think that maybe they were just prepared because they knew their powers kept getting destroyed. But the bottom line is it was handled extremely awkwardly. And I can only imagine how awkward it was if you didn't watch the movie. So you go from this sort of awkward Zeo finale that didn't feel like a finale, and then the next thing you know, it's Turbo, and everything is really different, and they're just telling you what happened. So I think that was handled very awkwardly. The movie itself I found to be okay. And then there's... I forgot where I was going with that. But the movie itself I found to be okay, is what I was going to say, with the exception of... the transition was handled very poorly, and I think that would be something I'd love to hear more about what they had planned for it. It's just one of those really lost mysteries of PR. And then getting into the series, it started off very awkwardly. Like I said, they were telling you about what happened, and there were so many changes. I mean, the theme song changed, the motif changed again, but this time you weren't eased into it, which I didn't really necessarily need to be eased into it every time, but it was extremely weird. And then Zordon and Alpha left in episode 1, or in the beginning episodes, which... I sort of get why they did it, and later on, I thought about it when Zordon needed to be away so he could get kidnapped for in space. So maybe they had that in the works. But they didn't need to have him leave so soon. Because especially for the way the show was, Zeo was a great example of keeping the same vibe and familiarity while changing things. And they should have kept that going until you kind of gradually got used to the changes instead of being so abrupt. And Zordon and Alpha leaving just sort of took another level away from the world. So it was just really weird. And then you have Demetria and Alpha 6, who I'll talk about in characters, but I didn't think were very good replacements at all. And then you have new stuff like the detonators and the new villains, which are very weird. And it just all felt weird. It felt like you were in a parallel universe of the show you'd watched. A lot of people say they dropped off sometime after MMPR, and if you dropped off a Turbo, I can definitely get it. I still think that it's annoying when people are like, oh, I stopped watching after MMPR, and then it's all crap, because they looked away right when the series essentially started climbing to quality, but I can see why Turbo might lose you, because there was a lot of changes quick, and there was definitely a different vibe. And on top of that, you also had stuff like Balkan Skull becoming monkeys. But anyway... It was a very awkward vibe. The whole thing felt awkward. It was essentially the first half of Turbo, with the main original cast, with the exception of Justin, was very awkward and mainly a filler. about detonators and monsters. And the detonators I thought was a cool new idea to spice things up, but then it became kind of overplayed. But it was very awkward. I didn't even notice this as much until the recent years, that Tommy wasn't around very much during that time. Probably has to do something with him wanting to quit, maybe his schedule, but he was at the garage often, and more often than not, the bulk of the plot of the week would center with Adam and Tanya, Kat, and Justin, and Tommy would show up to fight, and then he'd be there for the funny executive producer Hames Saban and Shuki Levy moment. But he didn't seem to be around a lot. So it was just this very awkward thing, and the only thing to really happen in the first half between the pilot and Passing of the Torch was the Millennium Message, which essentially gave this interesting foreshadowing for pretty much the events of next season's Countdown to Destruction. They said it would be in the year 2000, and I'm curious if they had actually planned that long storyline, or a rough idea, or if that was just to make it sound cooler and they knew they were going to do it sooner. Because I know In Space was supposed to be the final. But anyway, the bottom line is it was cool foreshadowing. Unfortunately, after that, the Blue Centurion, who was this cool robot cop from the future, wound up just writing parking tickets for the rest of the series. But that was pretty much the only thing to happen until Passing the Torch. Now, there's lots of behind-the-scenes stuff. If I remember right, JDF and Catherine Sutherland wanted to leave, but the other two didn't. But they decided just to completely overhaul the show. Now, Passing of the Torch, I think, was for the most part a rushed idea, but they did handle some things well in it. The idea itself, like I said, was rushed. It was introduced to you very quickly. I think that I feel like they would have known a few episodes before prior filming, not to mention that Carlos and Ashley were in a couple episodes. I would have liked to have seen some sort of foreshadowing about the choice the Rangers had to make. They wouldn't have to tell us that they were going to have to pass the torch, but just a general line, to get you an idea of it, because it came on so suddenly. So that was overall rushed. The whole idea of them leaving was essentially all in the episode. They're like, oh hey, we forgot we have this major decision to make, oh here's the guys, bye. And it was really quick. But things in the episode were handled well around it. Carlos and Ashley were introduced early, so you at least knew who they were. Now, TJ and Cassie, despite the fact that they were actually introduced in the episode, as opposed to earlier, I thought I got used to them better, quicker. I really liked them off the bat, and easily accepted them into the show. I found Carlos and Ashley to be a little more boring, to be honest. I'll get into that when I go over characters briefly. But I thought that TJ and Cassie's introductions were handled well. So you could see why they were being chosen. And the sort of, Adam and Tanya observing Ashley and Carlos was kind of creepy, but also kind of cool at the same time with this passing the torch vibe. And the scene was done well in a sense that I was kind of cool passing on to new generation. Zordon was there and everything. Although it does seem kind of funny. The whole excuse was, it's time for you to move on with your lives because you've dedicated your whole youth to this. But it's like, the Earth is under attack. Let's fire these veterans and put in these new guys. So as a result, when I was younger, I always thought that they lost in the final battle because they weren't experienced. Which, who knows, maybe that's why. But anyway, that seemed very weird. And the second half of Turbo Now was better, but it was still awkward. Now, the first episode after Passing of the Torch or whatever, was just a random filler about a dumb jacket curse. And I thought the first episode, or maybe two, could have been a really good opportunity to show the new Rangers' first time as a team and learning to become Rangers, and it could have been a neat little story arc. Instead, they just moved on as if it's always been this way, and it was very awkward. And there was quite a bit after that it was just kind of weird. Now, for the most part, I actually do like the new cast, especially next year and In Space. But it was just very weird the way it moved about and just added to the overall weird vibe of Turbo. Now, I said the second half is better, and that's true, because around mid-second half-ish, there was a solid arc of episodes that were actually really good. Mainly with the Phantom Ranger coming in, his mystery, them getting the new Rescue Zord, the Turbo Megazord being stolen. There was some actually really good episodes that had you intrigued, and there was some great high-stakes action. And then I went back to some dumb filler for a bit. And then Turbo finished really strong. Probably one of my favorite finales, actually. The stakes felt really high. The only moment I actually liked to meet her when she gave that speech about holding your heads high because you're the Power Rangers. And Divatox attacked, the power chamber was overrun, it was blown up, and the Rangers are like, oh man, Zordon's been kidnapped, and we gotta go find him. And it just felt really epic that the Rangers had been beaten down, but they had to hit the ground running into In Space. So that was a great finale, and I think that it was just as good in terms of a build-up for next season as Zeo. It wasn't as long, but it was a great momentum. But yeah, for the most part, awkward. Now to quickly go over the characters before we get to summary, I'm going to kind of lump all the original cast in one thing, because they really didn't do much. They kind of just existed. Their main character traits was they each had a sort of job. Tanya was in the radio, Adam was in some sort of like stunt show, Tommy did cars, which I thought was awkward. I know they needed to keep him away for whatever reason, but I don't think we needed to do something involved with the theme because we never done it before, so it felt out of place. And then Kat had something with dancing, and she ended up getting a scholarship in London. But they essentially just existed, and it definitely felt like they weren't really doing anything. And I feel like almost they knew from the beginning that they weren't going to have the Rangers around that long. So really nothing happened to them of note, other than they stayed the same characters you knew. Now in the middle here is Justin, who was the only member of both Ranger teams. Now Justin gets a lot of heat, and he's kind of a controversial character, I guess you could say. It's kind of one way or the other. And every time I rewatched Turbo, there was something different, or I felt differently about Justin. When I was younger, I actually really liked him, because I wanted to be a Ranger too when I was a kid. And then every other rewatch, I'd be like, I like him, I don't like him, I like him, I don't like him. And ultimately, it just comes down to I'm okay with him. I don't think the idea was good. I think maybe for the movie, it could have been a really cool gimmicky thing for the movie, and then maybe give the mantle to someone else. Jason was right there, and he had just lost his powers. But anyway, even as dumb as the Power Rangers universe could be, especially in those early days, the idea of a kid being a Ranger did not make sense. It didn't make sense that Zordon or Demetria would let that happen. It just seemed really dumb, and one of the things that made it feel out of place. As a character, Justin was pretty annoying in the first half a lot of the time, and he was kind of mellowed out in the second half. So I'm overall okay with him. I don't absolutely hate him, but I don't love him either. I just don't... I'm more upset at the concept, because it just doesn't seem like they would do it. Especially when they went through all those times when the Rangers turned into kids not too long ago, and they wouldn't fight. My camera's doing the blurry thing again, and I thought I fixed it. There, that fixed it. Anyway, so yeah, that's Justin. Now the second cast, I started to go over my thoughts on them, and I'll lump Carlos and Ashley together real quick, in that I was okay with them. I found them to be pretty boring in Turbo. I liked them a lot more next year, when I felt like they kind of came into their own more. Similar to Kat, with MMPR to Zio. I felt like I really actually got to get a feel for her as a character in the following year. So I really don't have a whole lot to say about them. They were pretty boring. Now TJ and Cassie, like I said, they had a really good entrance. I really liked TJ a lot. I thought he was a really good leader, he had good presence. And what I liked about him is that, unlike in the previous years with characters, pretty much all of them, but you know, like leaders like Jason or Tommy, it seemed like you were constantly being told about how good they were. It was almost shoved in your face, like, look, they volunteer, they're good people. But with TJ, with his introduction, he selflessly wanted to help Tommy and just could not ignore helping someone. And throughout that, his whole introduction and his character is you just knew he was a good person based on his actions, and you felt like he was a hero based on his actions, and you didn't have to be told about it because he does some BS charity work. And I liked that. And the same goes for Cassie. And I liked that she was different, and that she wasn't like a goody two-shoes like, oh, we've got to help them because it's the right thing. She was more like, I want to help them, but I'm late for this bus, and it could be dangerous. And I liked that there was that conflict there. That she was clearly a good person who wanted to help, but she also thought about the consequences of it, even the selfish ones. So I liked that they were both shown to be good people and worthy of, camera being blurry, of being Rangers. But they didn't shove it down your throats. And I thought that was a good transition into it not being so overwhelmingly goody two-shoes. So I really did like them. Now, as far as side characters, I was really disappointed with what happened with Balkan Skull. I really loved their development into the junior police and then the detectives. And this season they turned them into monkeys, which I believe was because they were going to be doing a Balkan Skull spinoff that never happened. But then after that, which was already a dumb arc, they sort of just did odd jobs, which could have been funny, and there was some funny-ish bits, like them doing a monster tour. But for the most part, I thought it was really poor, and I thought Balkan Skull could have done better. I almost said Spike. I would have rather them just stayed as detectives or police officers for the remainder of the series. It was just a terrible mishandling, and yet another thing that made Turbo feel awkward. Lieutenant Stone as well, who just took over the juice bar when Ernie left. It felt like a very odd move. And then you have the new mentors. Delphine, why do I keep wanting to call her Delphine? Demetria was from Equestria, or Equestria? I don't know. She was Inquisitor. All of her talk was done through questions, which was really annoying. Like I said, she was a really jarring contrast to Zordon, and I really didn't like her except for that one line she delivered in the finale. And Alpha 6 from in Turbo, like as if in space, from Turbo, was the worst thing ever. He was just so annoying. The whole, like, street talk, like, yo, 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 Regis, we got a monster, need your grove pack. It was so weird, and it seemed like it was so clearly trying to be hip or something, and it was so weird, and I love that they saw their mistake and essentially just made him a better version of Alpha 5 next year. But God, that was so awkward, and like just yet another thing that made Turbo feel weird. Now I mentioned the Blue Centurion, which I like the concept of him, and I thought it was really lame that this future cop from a supposedly war-torn-ish future is stuck here and then essentially just writes parking tickets the whole time. So that was kind of lame. Now Phantom Ranger was really cool. He was really mysterious, kind of like, you know, repeating the concept of a mystery with the Gold Ranger, except the mystery never ended. We still don't know who he is. But I thought it was really cool that he came from Eltar and that he brought the Rangers their powers. There's a rumor, I don't know if it was a rumor or confirmed, that somebody said they were going to make him Billy, which would have been cool because if Billy made the turbo powers, then it would make complete sense that he brought them the rescue swords. But regardless, I thought he was a cool character and gave you the vibe there was stuff going on outside of Earth, which we definitely get next season, and that he was an assistant to the Rangers. He created a good mystery and definitely brought things to the show that were needed at the time. Now, villains-wise, the villains here were pretty ridiculous. Divatox was super campy. I don't absolutely hate her, but I don't really love her either. And there was two different ones, too, because the one from the movie left for a while and then came back because of, like, pregnancy or something. But overall, I'm not a huge fan of Divatox. Like I said, I found her to be pretty campy, which I think is funny, because she is just as campy, if not more at times more campy than Rita and Zed. And yet she defeated the Power Rangers, which I think is really funny. And her whole crew, there's not really much to them. Elgar was comedic relief. I was okay with Elgar. And then you have Rygog and Porto, which were just kind of bland. And overall, it was a really weird villain set. And I have to mention that the Car Ranger, like, monsters of the day, stop being blurry, were some of the dumbest looking, which Car Ranger is supposedly a very comedic series. So I see why, but it definitely contributed to the weirdness, and the footage in general did, which I'll get into in one sec, but overall I found the villains to be okay. It was kind of a weird transition into the villains as well, but it ended up all kind of gelling next year. There was a mystery potential introduced that Divatox and Demetria were sisters, because like a robot friend, or a friend of Demetria's, came to reveal that she was adopted, which seemed really weird, and then they never fleshed it out. And, like I said, Demetria was really odd, and I didn't care for her. But that could have actually made me like her more in the sense that if they had played that out for part of the season, or at least for an arc, about them being sisters, it could have had something interesting going on in Turbo. But I think that's it for characters. Before I get to a final little verdict, or whatever, I'll talk about the footage for a second. Like I mentioned, Car Ranger was a very comedic series, apparently. So that resulted in a lot of dumb episodes and dumb things, including like the first Megazord fight in the main show being kind of stupid, or the transformation, because you could tell it was played more comedically in the footage, but in this one it didn't make sense because they were all experienced. But anyway, I actually would have been really cool with them keeping the Zeo suits for one more year and having them pilot the Turbo Zords, because not all the mech fights, or the Megazord fights, were stupid. Damn it, blurry. I don't know why it's doing that, honestly. So, the mech fights in Car Ranger, with the exception of a few, weren't all terrible. So they could have done some non-stupid footage that they got from Car Ranger with the Zeo suits, and then have them pilot the turbo cars. I just thought it would have been cool, mainly because the Zeo suits were such a big deal. It would have been nice to see them stick around, and the colors correspond, and the Zeo suits are such a nice blank slate that I wouldn't have had any problem with them piloting technological car Zords. And even though it makes sense in my head now, it doesn't seem as weird as a Mastodon-themed hero piloting a lion and then a frog. Which, like I said, now in my head it makes sense because of the show. But I thought that could have been cool. I like the turbo suits fine, and I guess I'm ultimately okay with what happened, but if they had done that, I wouldn't have been upset. I wouldn't have kept the Zeo suits, or any of the suits, for as long as they kept them in PR. But maybe, just due to the importance and the footage, I thought it would have been neat to keep it for a year. But that's just one thing. But just to wrap it up, overall, like I said, Turbo was a very awkward year. It had a couple strong arcs and concepts that would ultimately lead us into a brighter future for the show, mainly in space. And it ended strong, which is mainly what jettisoned us into space. But overall, very awkward transition year. I don't think it was entirely, I would say, the show's fault or the writer's fault, just because so many things happened with the cast quitting and then drama carrying over from Zio and the footage change and the movie decision. Just, I felt like a lot of behind-the-scenes decisions and circumstances led to Turbo being more awkward than it should have. So overall, it's probably one of my least favorite seasons, to be honest. As I went through this rewatch, my enjoyment ramped up from starting season 1 low and then 2, 3, and Zio, and then it kind of took a dip. And unfortunately, it's back up now, because In Space is one of my favorites. Probably my favorite. But anyway, a very awkward year. It was just, it hadn't been since MMPR season 1 that I had been so bored with so many of the episodes. So it's very unfortunate, but luckily I think that the worst is behind me, and now from now on I will have PR seasons that are for the most part enjoyable and have more going on. But yeah, that is it for this one. Look forward to In Space next. I am about 10 episodes from being done. I don't know when it'll be filmed though, but it should be soonish. And don't take my word on this, because you know how I was with the Die Ranger, but I am thinking about doing a special vlog, or vlog like this, ramble, rather, that would take place either between this one and In Space, or between In Space and Lost Galaxy, that would just be called Why Power Rangers is Special. And it's basically something I've been thinking about through this Zordon era, of what makes Power Rangers special from Sentai, which I feel like gets lost on a lot of blurry people like me and Sentai purists. And I had a lot of ideas for the vlog, so that might happen. But anyway, that's about it for this one. I've talked long enough. Until next time, make sure you check out the Crazy Podcast at WritersRangersRambles.com. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And sorry about the blurry again.